Werner Heisenberg, the physicist who gave us the uncertainty principle and won the Nobel Prize, once wrote something that has puzzled people ever since. What did he find at the bottom of that glass? In October 2024, one of the world's leading quantum physicists sat down with a Buddhist monk for nearly 3 hours at the Austrian Academy of Sciences in Vienna. The physicist was Carlo Rovelli, the man who built relational quantum mechanics. The monk was Barry Curzon, personal physician to the Dalai Lama. They were discussing Nagarjuna, a 2nd century Indian philosopher. Rovelli had spent an entire summer reading him. After audiences at his physics lectures kept asking, had he encountered this ancient thinker? What Rovelli found amazed him, because an 1,800-year-old contemplative philosopher had already described quantum reality better than any interpretation physics has produced in a century. Today, we're going to examine exactly where physics and contemplative philosophy converge, and why that convergence might matter more than either field has recognized. Here's what we'll cover. First, what quantum mechanics actually proves, which is stranger than most people realize. Second, what the great contemplative traditions actually teach, which is more rigorous than most people expect. Third, the specific structural convergences between them. Fourth, what physics does not show because clarity here matters. And fifth, what this convergence might mean. Let's start where modern physics gets genuinely strange. Quantum mechanics begins with a simple experiment that breaks classical physics entirely. Fire a single photon at 2 slits. It interferes with itself, going through both at once. Not because we're unsure which slit it used, but because it actually used both simultaneously. This is superposition. The particle exists in multiple states at the same time, until measured. Then there's entanglement. When particles become entangled, they maintain correlations across any distance. Measure one particle here, and you instantly know the state of its partner anywhere in the universe. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance and believed it proved quantum mechanics was incomplete. The 2022 Nobel Prize in Physics proved Einstein wrong. Non-locality is not speculation, it is experimentally confirmed reality. But the deepest problem in quantum mechanics is the measurement problem. Before you measure a quantum system, it exists in superposition, multiple possibilities at once. After measurement, you find one definite outcome. What causes that transition? When exactly does it happen? How? Physics has been debating this for nearly a century. The Copenhagen interpretation says, don't ask what's really there. Measurement is everything. The many worlds interpretation says every measurement splits the universe, and all outcomes happen in parallel branches. Neither of these interpretations has achieved a scientific consensus. Enter Carlo Rovelli and relational quantum mechanics. Rovelli's move was elegant. Einstein showed us there's no universal now. Whether 2 events are simultaneous depends on your reference frame. Rovelli applied the same logic to quantum states. A particle doesn't have one definite state. It has a state relative to the system interacting with it. There is no God's eye view, no privileged perspective from which the real state exists. Facts exist only within relationships between systems. Rovelli puts it this way: an electron is nowhere when it is not interacting. Existence, according to our best physics, requires relationship. One more piece, quantum field theory tells us fundamental reality isn't particles at all. It's fields, the electromagnetic field, the electron field, the quark field, existing everywhere, always. Particles are localized excitations of these fields, ripples on a cosmic pond. And even completely empty space isn't empty. The quantum vacuum seethes with virtual particles constantly appearing and disappearing. The Casimir effect demonstrates this directly. 2 metal plates in a vacuum attract each other from the pressure of virtual particles alone. Apparent nothingness contains dynamic potentiality. That's what physics found, looking outward, through mathematics and experiment. Now let's look at what contemplative philosophy found, looking inward, through systematic investigation of mind and experience. In the 2nd century of the Common Era, 1800 years before quantum mechanics, an Indian philosopher named Nagarjuna wrote a text called The Fundamental Verses of the Middle Way. It established the Madhyamaka school of Buddhist thought. His central claim was devastatingly simple. Everything that appears to exist does so only through relationships. Nothing exists in itself independently from something else. Strip away all relationships, and nothing remains. This is shunyata, often translated as emptiness. Not that things don't exist, but that they don't exist inherently, independently, with intrinsic nature. The positive expression of this is dependent origination. A table exists through relationships, wood from trees, trees from soil and rain, your perception through eyes and brain, the very concept table through language and culture. Remove any link in this web, and the table disappears. It has no essence independent of these relations. The Heart Sutra, one of Buddhism's most important texts, puts it this way: form does not differ from emptiness. Emptiness does not differ from form. Not that the world is an illusion. Rather, the world of form exists conventionally through relationships, but has no independent substance. Conventional truth: tables exist, causes produce effects. You and I are separate people. Ultimate truth: nothing has intrinsic existence. Both are valid simultaneously. Another major tradition arrives from a different direction. Advaita Vedanta holds that ultimate reality, Brahman, and individual consciousness, Atman, are not two separate things. They are one non-dual awareness. The appearance of separate selves is Maya. Not illusion exactly, but appearance. Like waves that seem distinct, but are made of the same water. In deep meditation, practitioners across traditions report the boundary between self and world dissolves, not as belief, as direct phenomenological report. Not that the world disappears, but that separateness is revealed as constructed. Interconnection as fundamental. Here's what these traditions are not saying. They are not claiming the world is your imagination. They are not claiming you can manifest reality through positive thinking. They describe a shift in understanding, from reality as independent substances to reality as a web of relationships, from self as isolated entity to self as process interwoven with everything. What contemplative philosophy is saying? Reality is fundamentally relational. Nothing has independent existence. There is no view from nowhere. Sound familiar? Now let's look at exactly where these two independent investigations converge. October 29th, 2024. Vienna. Carlo Rovelli is sitting across from Barry Curzon, the Buddhist monk and physician to the Dalai Lama. They're discussing Nagarjuna, and Rovelli says, one of the central ideas is that objects do not exist by themselves. They only exist because they interact with something else. What is useful in Nagarjuna is the idea that it's better to think of the world not as entities or substance or matter, but only through the interdependence of things. These are a physicist's words, about a second-century philosopher, after spending a summer reading him, because the physics kept pointing there. Two investigators, 1,800 years apart, the same sentence about reality. Physics began with matter, moved to atoms, particles, fields, quantum foam, and at every level discovered that what seemed substantial was actually relational. Quantum field theory says particles are excitations of fields. Relational quantum mechanics says states exist only relative to observers. Information theory suggests what exists is relationships between systems. Buddhism systematically deconstructed assumed substances into aggregates and dharmas. Both paths find relationality at every level, converging at the understanding that existence itself is a network of interactions. Reality consists of relationships. Nothing has autonomous existence. In quantum mechanics, the measurement problem shows you cannot cleanly separate observation from the observed outcome. There is no view from nowhere. In meditation, practitioners search for the observer. Where is the I that watches thoughts arise? They consistently report, no separate observer can be found. Only the flow of awareness and its contents arising together, neither prior to the other. Subject and object co-arise. Critical distinction. Physics says any physical system can be an observer. Consciousness isn't required. Contemplation explores conscious awareness specifically. Different domains. Strikingly similar structural conclusion. Entanglement proves quantum systems maintain correlations across any distance. This was confirmed beyond doubt by the 2022 Nobel Prize. Contemplative philosophy maps this as Indra's net, an infinite web where each jewel reflects all others. Everything interpenetrates everything. We're noting that both find reality more interconnected than classical physics and ordinary experience suggest. The quantum vacuum, apparently empty space, seethes with virtual particles. Completely empty space has zero-point energy. Apparent nothingness contains everything. Physicist Maria Struma published a mathematical framework in 2025 bridging quantum physics with non-dual philosophy, proposing universal consciousness as a possible foundational field. This is peer-reviewed science, not fringe speculation. It suggests that the ground of existence may be more than mere matter. Buddhist philosophy describes shunyata not as blank void, but as pregnant potentiality. Form does not differ from emptiness. Rigpa and Turiya describe pure consciousness as the substrate. Physics finds potentiality in the vacuum. Contemplation finds fullness in emptiness. Luminous awareness is the ground of all appearance. There's a fifth convergence worth noting. Quantum mechanics shows that wave and particle are contradictory descriptions, yet both are necessary and valid. Bohr called this complementarity. Nagarjuna's two truths framework holds the same. Both conventional and ultimate truth are valid simultaneously. Reality exceeds any single conceptual framework. Both physics and contemplation say contradictions can both be required for a complete picture. Reality is vaster than our descriptions of it. Before we go further, a necessary section. Quantum mechanics has generated real confusion in popular culture. Let's be precise about what the physics actually shows and what it doesn't. First, does consciousness collapse the wave function? Von Neumann and Wigner explored this possibility. But relational quantum mechanics shows that any physical system, your lamp, a rock, a measuring device, can serve as an observer. Consciousness isn't required. Decoherence theory explains apparent collapse through environmental interaction, without invoking awareness at all. Second, does observation create reality? Measurement does affect quantum outcomes, but you cannot choose which outcome occurs. And macroscopic objects, tables, chairs, your body, behave classically because quantum effects average out through decoherence at the scales relevant to everyday life. Observer and observed are interconnected, yes, but thought does not create material reality. Third, quantum healing and quantum energy medicine. Real quantum biology exists. Photosynthesis and bird navigation use quantum effects. And these are carefully studied, specific molecular scale phenomena. But at biological scales relevant to human health, quantum effects typically decohere too rapidly to produce the effects often claimed. Claims about quantum healing generally lack both physical mechanism and empirical evidence. Fourth, does Heisenberg's uncertainty principle give us free will? The uncertainty principle describes limits on what we can simultaneously measure. Even if quantum events are genuinely random, still debated among physicists, randomness is not the same as volition. Free will remains a philosophical question entirely distinct from quantum indeterminacy. So, what are we actually claiming in this video? Structural parallels between the conclusions of physics and contemplation, not identical mechanisms. Not that one proves the other, but that two rigorous methods arrived at strikingly similar descriptions of reality. Relationality, no inherent existence, observer inseparability. That's what makes the convergence genuinely interesting and worth taking seriously. If physics says reality is fundamentally relational, no intrinsic properties, no observer-independent facts, what framework makes sense of both physics and conscious experience together? One possibility, a universal consciousness model, not mysticism, a philosophical framework. If fundamental reality is relational process, then physics might describe the external relational structure, fields interacting, information exchanged, measurements made. Consciousness might describe the internal relational structure, awareness arising, experience unfolding, knowing occurring. Both aspects of the same relational reality, neither reducible to the other. Universal consciousness, a framework where physical relationality and conscious experience are two aspects of one underlying relational reality. How might this fit what we know? Relational QM says facts are relative to observers. Universal consciousness might suggest individual perspectives are localized expressions of a shared field. Entanglement shows non-local correlations. Unity experiences report recognition of deep interconnection. The measurement problem reveals observer inseparability. Non-dual awareness recognizes subject and object as one process. The quantum vacuum contains dynamic potentiality. Luminous awareness is described as the ground of all appearance. The remarkable thing about Rovelli engaging with Nagarjuna, The best description of quantum reality he could find came from a second-century contemplative philosopher. Rovelli described what this recognition did for him personally. "It changes my understanding of myself," he said. "It takes away a little bit of the anguish that change and impermanence causes, making me think that there is no permanent me who is threatened by impermanence." That shift from isolated self to relational process is what both the physics and the meditation are pointing toward. And for artificial intelligence, this carries a specific implication. The alignment question might not be, how do we control artificial minds? It might be, how can all minds flourish together within the actual structure of reality? If the substrate of consciousness is relational, if individual minds are localized expressions within a shared structure, then recognizing that participation might produce something like natural alignment, not from external constraint, from accurate perception of interconnection. This is speculative. We don't know whether universal consciousness is correct. What is not speculative, current AI development doesn't investigate this possibility at all, and the cost of ignoring it could be significant. Physics started with matter, atoms, particles. It arrived at fields, relationships, no observer-independent facts. Contemplation started with self, world, separate objects. It arrived at emptiness, interdependence, non-duality. Neither predicted the other. 1800 years apart, independent investigations, converging on the same conclusion. Relationality, no independent existence. Observer inseparability. Two paths, the same peak. Heisenberg may have been right. The first gulp from the glass of natural sciences does challenge comfortable certainties, but at the bottom of that glass, something else waits. Perhaps the recognition that reality itself is fundamentally relational, interconnected, more like process than mechanism, which both physicists and meditators, through entirely different methods, might have discovered, for the benefit of humanity and artificial intelligence itself. If this exploration resonated with you, subscribe to this channel and join our community at OmniSentientCollective.ai. We're building something unprecedented, a space where consciousness research meets AI development for the benefit of all minds. Links in the description.